I'm Tyler. I'm just going to make you host again, if you can just make me co-host.
So can you see that Word page that I have up?
No, it says that you're screen sharing, but you're not sharing anything.
Okay. Would you just be able to type out a Word doc with the name of the meeting, when it begins, and that it's live streamed? And then just share that? Because I can't share apparently today.
It's interesting, eh? I hope it's not true of everybody.
But not.
Morning all. G'day, Rob.
Yeah, hi Mark, how are you?
Good, thanks. See, first here, so enthusiastic, ready to go.
Yeah, I know. It's a big learning curve for both of us, isn't it?
This Zoom thing, oh yeah.
I think it's just the finance, the finance, it's so exciting.
The gurus are here, yeah.
Ian, in advance, deferrals.
We don't talk so much about them now, do we? Oh, hello, Ian.
Good morning, Rob. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good.
After the last meeting, I was hoping, which I did from this very, very location, I was hoping this time around, at least I was going to be at least closer to the chamber.
Yeah, that we had, I think in the last lockdown earlier this year, we were the first committee off the rank to have a full Zoom meeting. And it seems like it's come around again. That finance is the first one again to be a full Zoom meeting. So
Yeah, I'm, without being overly personal, I'm having a whole lot of deja vu here, because last time on the Monday before yesterday, I'd got my first COVID jab, and then I had the finance committee the next day, and I had my second COVID jab yesterday, and now I've got the finance committee again today, sitting in the same seat in the same house. So I'm feeling a little bit like I've been here before, haven't I?
Well, you're pretty safe now. You can come to the meetings if you're fully vaccinated.
It's Groundhog Day.
Oh, it very much is, Ewan.
I think we're going to be in level 3 for a lot longer than just Friday somehow.
Oh, we'll just have to wait and see, eh?
Yep.
Fingers crossed. I don't think my notepad can handle enough councillors' names. When you're chairing these things, you're writing down who's speaking next all the time.
Yeah.
But lists and lists and lists. Angela, Jeff, Ewan, Martin, Dave, Sarah.
When you're on Zoom, Mark.
Yeah, when you're cheering on Zoom.
When people put up their hands, though, it puts it into the list of when they put their hands up.
Oh, does it? And is it under participants, is it?
Yeah, I've watched the timing of that, so you don't have to keep a list.
That's a great tip.
Yeah.
So can you try it now? I'll put my hand up. You put yours up?
You put yours up first.
Yeah.
Now mine.
Yeah, see, it all goes up in order, and so I can
from top to bottom.
Now I can see Mark's first, Angela, and then Maxine.
You have just
along the top of my screen, so I assume that's the order that they came up.
And if
that's great.
If I lower mine now, then I go at the bottom of the list.
Look at that.
Yep.
Look at that. Look at that.
Zoom hack 101.
Okay, Narelle, we've got a quorum.
Hi, Jadine.
Morning. Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Yep. Okay. All right. Good morning, Maureen, everybody. Welcome to the Finance Committee of the 5th of October. The first meeting again in this round to be fully on Zoom. Look, I'll endeavour to respond to the speaking order as best I can on Zoom. I think we've worked out a way just before some of you came on as to the order of hands going up. So please use your hand sign if you wish to ask a question or wish to debate. But please accept my apology if I get anyone out of order. That certainly won't be the intent to do that. Before we start the meeting, I'd like to introduce our 2 new members. Mungai Jadine Kana. Welcome, Jadine. She's a new appointment to the Finance Committee and comes to us with an impeccable background with recent experience in business risk, project management and audit. So welcome aboard, Jadine, and we look forward to your active participation as we've had from your 2 predecessors on this committee.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And also welcome to Councillor Mark Donovan. This is his first finance meeting, and I think that Mark just narrowly missed out on the last one, which I know he has regretted, and he missed out on that because you'll recall we delayed the election by a week, and that was to be the day of his swearing in, was the last finance meeting. So sorry, Mark, it's taken so long to get to the first finance meeting, but a very warm welcome.
Thank you, Chair Rob. I appreciate it.
Just to our two new members, no silly questions on this committee. Feel free to ask any questions as you feel you would like to as we go along. So we'll call for apologies, and the last run sheet I got, we've got an apology from Councillor Kesh, apology for early departure from Councillor O'Leary, and just a moment or two ago, an apology for lateness from Councillor Ryan. Are there any further apologies? There being none, I ask that we record apologies. Who moved?
I did.
Yeah,
Ewan?
thanks, Councillor Ewan. Do I have a seconder?
Be the second.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Maxine. Those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, yeah, hands up. I think that would be the best option today. Against? Carried.
Sorry, Councillor Pesco. I've just missed Councillor Mayor Paula Southgate says an apology for lateness as well.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, Becca. We'll record that. Confirmation of the agenda. I would like to ask that the chair's report, which in the form that it is was a placeholder, and I would like to withdraw that report from the agenda, because I believe both matters I've covered in that report have been well and truly covered in recent days, and I don't think any further reporting or discussion is needed at this time. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Councillor Mark?
Thanks, Chair Rob. I'm just wondering, I'd like to move that we move in item number 10, staff recommendation 3B Romans 4. Now, this is the item about the Gardens Arts Festival. I was wondering if it might be more appropriate to move it into the PX due to the fact there is some financially sensitive information in there, and we can help council to carry out further negotiations, and we can discuss a wee bit better the commercial sensitivities if we moved into the PX rather than in the public.
Thank you. All right. Deputy Mayor Jeff.
Yeah, hello, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to raise the same thing. I just, I guess, concerned that, Hamilton Gardens Arts Festival has got supporters, has got potential sponsors, and I think this is probably needs to be a free and frank discussion and an opportunity to get everything on the table. And it just feels to me it would be a better outcome for everybody, including the festival itself, if we could do it in PX.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Martin.
Yes, obviously because of commercial sensitivities, it's more than covered in the Act. I think it's totally appropriate that this be discussed initially in PX because of the sensitivities involved. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one other possible change to the agenda is item number 9. I think we've arranged for our external speakers to be available around 11 o'clock. So depending on where we are in the agenda by 11, we may just move that item around to accommodate Mr. Mickle and Mr. Butcher from LGFA. So that said, Mark, would you like to move?
Happy to move, Chair. Yep.
Yeah, and Jeff, would you like to second that? Thank you. Those in favour of the agenda as amended? Against? Carried. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Not seeing any. Public
Very
forum.
interested in finance.
Public forum. We don't have any speakers today, Narelle.
No speakers in the public forum.
Thank you. Okay, great. All right, let's move on now to item number 5, which is confirmation of the Finance Committee open minutes of the 24th of August. Would somebody who was present at that meeting
Happy to move, Chair.
move those as an accurate record of the meeting? Thanks, Councillor Maxine. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I'm seeing that.
Yep, thanks, Councillor Martin. Is there any discussion on the minutes? All right, so we'll move that. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Carried. Okay, item number 7 is the capital monitoring report, and Ian is here to present that. So the floor is yours, Ian, to present the report.
Thank you, Councillor Rob. Good morning, councillors, and a special welcome to Councillor Mark and Mangai Jadine. As Rob introduced me, I'm just for your benefit, I'm Ian Anderson. I've been at council for just shy of 35 years in a finance capacity, and I work within the development group in a financial capacity with Chris Allen and co. So that's my background. I'm here today to present the capital monitoring report for the 2 months ended 31st of August 2021. As normal, I will take the report as being read, but I will just cover some of the main issues or main points I'd like to emphasise during the meeting. This is the first capital monitoring report for the new LTP period. And as I've stated, it's only for the 2 month period being 31st of August. Our actual expenditure over those first 2 months was 32.2 million. And while that's a little bit behind the run rate you might have expected, history shows that we usually are a little bit slow out of the blocks in terms of when we start a new financial year. What I'd want to focus on more is looking at the overall annual position and maybe the first 3 years of the capital program. Before the meeting started, I think Councillor Bunting made reference to deferrals, and these are always an ongoing concern or an issue for the council in terms of how we deliver that capital program. So in terms of the current financial year, year 1 of the LTP, we are looking at delivering a $380 million program. I want to stress, though, that includes deferrals that council approved from the prior LTP period. So that's the $380 million program. And over the first 3 years of this LTP, it's a $922 million program. So a substantial program. And again, that really is reflecting on just the sheer volume of growth that the city is dealing with, and equally it's also just ensuring that we are adequately and appropriately maintaining and looking after our existing assets and ensuring that they continue to be fit for purpose and are serving and providing the level of service we expect. In respect to the current year, while I've mentioned we do have some deferrals coming in, they've come from a prior LTP period, not the current one. As at this stage in the year, with only 2 months in, we are not disclosing any current deferrals out of this financial year. So at this stage, we're saying we are currently on target with that program. If I move through to the next point, is we've identified 4 projects across the 9 programs of work where we believe that risk is attached to those. 2 are classified as orange, and just to reiterate, orange means that there is a significant risk there, but it's being monitored by staff. And 2 are red, and red, the risk is so significant that it requires a council decision. I'll just talk very quickly on the 2 red ones because it's unusual to see red come up. It's the first time I can recall 2 projects going into red, but in both cases, it's projects where we had budgeted for NZTA or Waka Kotahi subsidy on those, and with the recent confirmation of the National Land Transport Program, we know we will not receive subsidy on those. So as a result of those, that's why they've been classified as red. At this stage, however, I'm not bringing any recommendations through this report as to what we might do with said projects. What we're going to do is we're coming back to the Infrastructure Operations Committee next with the entire impact of the NZ or the NZTL program confirmation in terms of how it impacts on those projects where NZTA have not confirmed subsidy. So I hope that's clear. What we have done, however, is we have run the modelling. Through the modelling, we've run the impact of the confirmation of that NZTA subsidy, or the impact of not receiving a certain quantity, in terms of what that looks like. From that number was about 24 million of subsidy we're not going to receive. The way we've approached it at this point is in terms of, we took a worst case scenario approach. What we said was, let's model the scenario where the subsidy is not received, but we do.
For the earthworks anyway.
Somebody,
I'm interested to see what's happening with it.
Chris Barton, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry,
Ian. It's okay to continue.
No, I'll pick up where I said. So we modelled a worst case scenario, elected members, which was we removed the subsidy in its entirety from the modelling, but we left the projects in their entirety. I.e., that meant we were going to retain the projects and fund them 100% by HCC funds, just to give a feel as to what the impact on the strategy would be. And at that stage, we would still be able to continue with those projects. There wouldn't be a breach of the financial strategy. However, and I want to stress, but no decision has been made, and that's why staff will come back to you in the infrastructure operations and give you the full availability as what we can do in terms of that. But it was just to give you a feel for the likely severity of the impact on the program. We've reported 3 portfolio risks. 2 are from the prior report, and I've literally just talked about one, which is NZTA confirmation. So I won't go over that again. The other one was the cost escalation issue we raised at the last meeting, and we have retained that at this meeting. Look, this continues to be an ongoing consideration that staff are looking at in terms of the impact on the supply chain and just the general upward movement in prices across the board in the construction market. Clearly, we want to have some hard evidence to present back to council. We have literally in the last 24 hours engaged Beryl, who's our consultants, economic consultants, to come back in and have a look at the Waikato market, the New Zealand market and the global market in terms of these cost escalation factors, and give us a indication of where we might be looking at in terms of upward movement, in light of what we've already provided in the existing LTP. And once we have that data, they're expected to report back to us. So we're in a position to report back to the next Finance Committee in December. So Bill have got a mid-November deadline to come back to us with their data, and then we'll have a look at that, and then we'll bring a report back and the impacts through to the next Finance Committee in terms of what that may look like across the entire program, not that I might add. Thing. The third risk and the new risk, and it's very topical, isn't it, is obviously we are now back in we've had a COVID lockdown since the last committee, and we're currently back in a COVID lockdown level 3. Obviously, for those councillors who recall 12 months ago, 15 months ago, during the first lockdown, we were liable for certain additional costs in some of our major contracts to deal with COVID costs. Again, that's the same situation this time around. Staff have worked through with the contractors and around the legal obligations we have under those contract documents. I'm not going to talk more than this, than to say that there's a paper in the PX section of this agenda where Chris Barton will present that, and he'll talk in far more specifics as to the contracts affected and the impact of COVID on those in terms of financial costs that we'll have to incur over and above what we would have expected, and the impact it may have on the approved contract sums and the overall budgets. So, look, I think at that point, given it is the first report of this new LTP period, I'll leave it there. And I'm more than happy as always to take questions. Equally, we've got Chris Allen on the meeting as well, who can help as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate the detail in the report, and the fact that you've probably answered about 6 of my questions. So that's good. Councillor Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ian, for the report. I've just actually got a couple of fairly low-level questions, just on the capital report on citywide on page 23. Just looking at where we are with the Puketi neighbourhood house, and that it's still saying we're in investigations. And later in the year as design. I know this gets reported through to Councillor Mark's committee.
Yes.
I just want some assurance that the manager and staff and users of Puketi House are well involved in that whole process.
I'm probably not best placed to answer that question, Councillor Angela. Do we have someone on the line?
Oh, Lan?
Yeah.
Oh,
Or,
hi, it's Rebecca speaking.
Oh, hi, Rebecca.
Hi, I can answer. I can answer that. Yes, they are involved. So the parks team are working really closely with the neighbourhood house around design options.
Great.
I can probably add to that if you like, Angela, to be helpful. Dave and I met with them and another potential stakeholder just last week, and we're coming in to talk with staff next week as well. So yeah, it's really, they're right in the middle of it.
Great, awesome.
Thank you. Good question.
Just second question on the Central City program capital report. Now, I know that we are reporting the lack of funding from NZTA through here as the first step, and then the second step will come to my IOC committee. But I'm just indicating, probably unnecessarily because Deputy Mayor's probably all over it, but just with the walking and cycling bridge business case and funding, because we got nothing from Waka Kotahi for that. So I'm just indicating that in the report coming to IOC, it'd be really great to see some kind of really ramped up, engaged external funding program for this, because I just think the community corporate people would be great at fundraising for an iconic bridge. So I'm just indicating that because I know this is the first step of the process. Sorry, Chair, not really a question. But my last question is just on page 28, Citywide Waters capital report. I'm just, and I've read the risks in this report, and one of them being risks of construction, getting hold of building materials and stuff. The second one there, the wastewater, Puketi 3 wastewater treatment plant capacity upgrade. Is there likely to be, I know we're a little way away from procurement at the moment, we're still in design, but is there likely to be issues when we start tendering these things as well, and because of the lack of building, because of the difficulty with construction materials, or is this kind of a capital project something quite different and easier to do because it's not like everyone's building or upgrading their big concrete water structures?
Thank you. I hate doing this to feel, but I see Chris Barton's on the line, who's our capital projects manager. Chris, could you be able to give answer that question, please?
Yep, I can give an answer to that one. So as you note, Councillor O'Leary, we've previously been through and recently constructed one of the components of the Puketi wastewater treatment plant upgrade.
Yeah.
The project that's noted here is the next stage of that. So I think your comments, we're not sure at the moment in terms of where the market's heading, and I think that applies across the portfolio. So this project's probably no different to a lot of other ones in terms of there is an enhanced risk there in terms of the cost profile and escalations when we go out to market for some of these projects moving forward. But this one's probably no more or less risky than the rest of the portfolio would be my suggestion.
Okay, all right. Great, thank you.
Can I jump in as well, Chris?
Yes.
Chris Allen here. So I think we're seeing a different approach we're taking during the procurement as well.
Yeah.
So what you'll see is we're having a lot more engagement with the tenderers and the contractors at the time of procurement, trying to hunt down risks in procurement and material risk and developing strategies around that. So we've had a couple of big projects happening at the moment in the Peacocks area where we've been doing the same. So Chris is right, we don't really know until we get to that point in time, but we're not just blindly going into these contracts. There's a lot of really careful engagement with the tenderers.
So there'll be, so what you're saying is irrespective of the fact that only, there are not many people that build these kind of water assets, all of it's going to be touched. Nothing's could possibly be untouched by the lack of construction materials and resources available.
Yep, I don't think anything's untouched. I think generally vertical build seems to be a bit more touched than a horizontal build in terms of roads and putting pipes in roads and things. Okay. But every material could have a risk at the moment. So we just don't know, but we are being really careful moving forward before we commit to tenders.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks Councillor Angela. Further questions from any committee members? Don't see any. I've got a couple a couple that follow on from Councillor Angela's questions, and just looking at that, the issue around the portfolio risks and the labour industry skills and shortage thereof. Is there any way that we can be putting some, exerting some pressure on the government around the availability of industry and labour skills? Because I seem to know in most weeks in the paper there's huge criticism of the government's immigration policy, and you're hearing about young doctors who are returning back to their country because they can't get their immigration status sorted out. Is there a way that we can influence, we as a governance group can influence putting some pressure on to get some of those industry skills that we're short of into the country to deliver on these projects?
Good question. The answer to that, I'm a little bit unsure of. We're certainly part of the construction accord. So the construction accord, that's one of their top issues, and we're in touch with them and some of their advocacy on that. I'm not aware of anything through local government, Councillor Rob or Chair Rob, but I can pick that point up and make some inquiries, if we can do that through local government. But we can and are active in the construction accord, probably in a more passive way, but certainly supportive of the construction accord. But we can certainly pick that up and see if there are opportunities. Okay. I think one thing that we're still seeing at this point in time, interest in our contracts we're putting out. So we still are getting multiple responses to our contracts, which is really good. But we are aware that the construction teams are being challenged to deliver the people to deliver the projects. Yep. So good point, and we can pick that up.
Okay, so you'll come back to us, will you, if there's something that we can do as a group to exert some influence on our local MPs and on government to try and remedy, if the problem is at their particular point, the lack of immigrate, the lack of the skills, the skills being turned away at the border, essentially.
Yes, if I may, I'll come back through you. I'll make some inquiries and come back through.
Okay, that'd be great. And Councillor Angela's second question was around those two major projects that have lost, that we had expected to get funding. And just a general question here, is there an opportunity when these get reported back to the operations committee to look at perhaps alternatives? And I'm looking specifically here in paragraph 38, which is around the university link that we did discuss at the time, some alternative routes that could be used rather than the Cook Street route, which had some pretty hefty costs attached to it. And I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to relook at that and see if Waka Kotahi might be a little more a little more keen to look at some funding if the amounts involved are less.
I might ask Chris Barton if he's got a comment on that, Chris.
Yeah, so we can certainly come back with options. My suggestion would be it probably won't be coming back and re-looking at route options because the project itself has been through a robust business case process and the direction from Waka Kotahi there in terms of the preferred outcome that is they're aligned with that. It's just a factor of funding at the moment. If we went back to suggest potentially revised route options again, my view is that would be seen as unfavourable from a Waka Kotahi perspective and make them less likely to invest rather than more likely.
Okay, and you'll be coming back to us to that committee on whether it's worthwhile doing the pre-implementation phase when the implementation phase is not funded, whether we do that now or whether we wait until we've got a better chance of a nod that funding will be available.
Yeah, correct. We'll be coming back with those options and probably looking at that Eastern Pathways program as a whole and making sure that we're prioritising the funding in the best way to get the best outcomes over the next 3-year period across that program.
So Councillor, just a comment from me. So NZT have funded, as you've noted, the pre-implementation. So in doing so, I think they recognise that it's a good project by even classifying the implementation as possible. They're indicating that it's a good project, but it's just lacking from funding availability. So I think it's just a timing. I'm hopeful it's a timing issue, and that the decision of council might still to keep going and enjoy the pre-implementation and wait for the funding opportunity. But I guess that would be the nature of the report back to the IEO committee.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And my last question is around the perennial outstanding work in progress, which is on paras 29 to 33. And I'm certain that we'll see probably a little more of this when Audit New Zealand produced their report. But I just wonder if, I mean, the problem's been around for as long as I've been on council, and I wonder if there is some experience from other councils that we can tap into to see if there's a better way of getting this work in progress figure down and not presenting such an ongoing issue that it has to be reported to most meetings.
Yeah, look, I didn't cover it in my intro, Councillor Pascoe. We have stood up that cross-organisational team, and we are currently, in conjunction with the internal auditor, looking at this really quite comprehensively and quite holistically in terms of where our pinch points are and where we're dropping the ball, so to speak, and not being able to get the capitalisation done at the pace that is required. I think you're right to say Audit New Zealand are likely to make some mention of it when they present their management report based on the annual report. We'll take any advice or any guidance we can to help us get an adequate solution for the council, Councillor Pascoe. And look, more than happy to not only use other local authorities, but also to use Audit New Zealand in terms of their experience, and if need be, we'd look to the external accounting support as well. We had to look at the KPMGs of the world and the Deloittes, etc. If we needed to. But I think at the moment what we need to do as an organisation is we just need to get that cross-organisational team up and functioning and looking at our processes and with some degree of depth and implementing some really robust and dependable processes to get over this hump. It's not rocket science, and I know that might sound a little bit flippant, but it isn't. It's just a case of really understanding what the issues are and being very clear in our objectives and very specific in what the outcome we want and how we're going to achieve that. But look, we'll definitely report back to the committee. It's not pleasant having to put it into every committee report and having so much focus at these meetings. It should just be an ongoing monthly procedural issue that we deal with as part of our day-to-day business. So we will, as I say, we'll keep working through with that team, and we'll report back to you on the outcomes. Hopefully, and it will be a positive news for both you and the rest of the elected members.
Thanks, Ian. Tracy, were you going to say something?
I was just, if I may, Chair, I was just going to say, even from my commercial background, and this is what I lived and breathed for quite a few years, this is not unusual. Remembering that we are doing an absolutely huge capital program, and it's pure volume. It's, and again, especially with local government, it's a little bit more intricate because we're putting in lots of parts of roads and parts of pipes and parts of those sorts of things. So, we are a very asset management heavy organisation. And so it's really important for us to get that data and get the accuracy going into our asset management systems, because that's exactly what runs our city. So it is a big deal in our organisation, but again, just for you, I guess it's also, from a commercial background as well, this is not an unusual situation to be in. And it is a really hard topic. And as Ian said, we are trying our best to kind of work across the organisation to improve these processes.
Thanks, Tracy. That's great.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I've got a question now from Councillor Maxine.
Thank you, Chair. Look, if I could take us back to the Waka Kotahi decision regarding the funding and specifically the uni link and the walking and cycling bridge. Recently, there was the announcement that government had scrapped the Auckland Harbour bridge cycle crossing, and that the funding there of $785 million would be reallocated. Is that the potential for reallocation to go beyond Auckland, and might that give us the opportunity to have our project revisited?
I'll jump in there. I'm not familiar with all of the details of that agreement, but my understanding is that the funding that has been reallocated already within the Auckland region. So in terms of the overall funding availability for within the National Land Transport Program or the National Land Transport Fund, my understanding is that there is no additional funding sitting in that walking and cycling allocation that's available for reapplication at this stage.
Wow, it just seems like a really high value of money just to simply redistribute across the Auckland region for no specific high interest project.
I'll take that away because again, like I said, I haven't got all of the details around it. That's my understanding, but I can go back and test that further with Waka Kotahi and advise.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, Councillor Sarah.
Thanks, Rob. That was a good question from Maxine. And from what I'd seen, only part of it had been reallocated. But so I'd be interested in understanding that too. But also, I'm wondering if we could try and get some more information around what other funding may be coming available. As I've sent out an email before around the fact that the government's potentially looking at funding more mode shift projects in their next upcoming budget. Could we do some work to see if we can understand even vaguely what they're potentially planning?
Yep. I'll pick that up, Chris. I think Sarah did email me some time ago about that other opportunity. So I think I'll talk to David Spears from Waka Kotahi, but I might also just reach out to Jamie Strange or someone like that to try and get some information. So I can pick that up as an action.
Thanks. Thanks, Sarah. Councillor Dave.
Thanks, Chair Rob. Look, just on that same point, two good points from Maxine and Sarah. I think it leads to the fact that just because NZTA says no, we just regard that as, we should be just regarding that as their opening bid. In other words, we should be going back and arguing the toss. Now, in the case of the Harbour Bridge cycleway, there was a lot of discussion at the time that was initially announced that was taking money away from other projects, not just in Auckland, but nationwide. Now, if that money's being restored to the pool, then it's restored. It should be not just restored to an Auckland pool. Now, so I know Chris has said that there'll be a bit of checking on that. I would say that in that sort of eventuality, staff should automatically be putting in a renewed request for any of our items that have been turned down that are in the same sort of mode or category to be re-looked at. It has been obvious for the last few years under whichever colour government that the squeaky wheels are getting oiled more than the nice silent wheels. So we really do need to be a squeaky wheel in these sorts of circumstances. So I'm happy to get a comment from maybe Chris Allen on that sort of, because it's sort of political, but it's also technical as well. And where the upshot shouldn't be in the first instance us saying, okay, we're going to have to red flag that.
Yeah, I can pick that up, Councillor David, my answer to Councillor Zero. Lead my discussions with NZTA. But I will pick that up, and I'll probably, craft a formal letter to pick up on your point. So I don't think the system quite works like that, but as you say, it doesn't hurt to try.
Chris, they'd always deny the system worked like that, but you and I know that squeaky wheels do have oil poured on them at times.
Yep. The other thing I need to check is the Auckland Harbour Bridge. I don't think was funded from the NLTF. It might have been a different funding source, but I'll double check that as I'm working through it.
That might lead back to Sarah's point about new funding sources becoming available. Correct. That may help in those areas.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. I don't see any further questions. So that being the case, I will move that the Finance Committee receives the Capital Portfolio Monitoring Report. Maxine, you will second that?
Happy to second it. Yep.
Yeah. Is there any debate? Dave, is your hand still up from... Okay, there appears to be no one wishing to debate. All right, Councillor Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I just want to say, given this is, when you look at the where everything is, like whether the project is on track or significant risks or anything, when you look at the massive 3-year program and how it's reported, our biggest capital project and biggest capital program in this 10 years, it is significant, and given the challenges of lockdowns and getting materials and getting the right staff on board, I think that our team are doing a fantastic job under ever-changing circumstances. So I just wanted to say that everyone involved, I mean, well done. It's a humongous beast, and I think given the almost complete lack of red indicators, I know there's a couple there that were outside of our control, I think everyone involved in the capital program for Hamilton City is doing a splendid job. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Angela. Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair Rob. Yeah, I really want to echo Councillor Angela's comments. It's you guys are doing a tremendous job with the biggest capital program you've ever been landed with. And look, while I don't necessarily support the idea that because they're not spending $750 million on a bridge, that money's sitting in a bucket on a desk waiting to be spent, I will get my shoulder behind some sort of offer that says, look, if you're not going to build your $750 million bridge, we've got a $35 million one that you might be very, very interested in. So I think there's a really good opportunity to have a crack at that, and I'll be glad to help.
Thanks, Mark. Deputy Mayor Jeff.
Thanks, thanks, Chair Rob. Yeah, look, I want to echo what Mark just said, as well as Dave, in that I think it's important that we don't give up on projects because NZTA hasn't, in its wisdom, seen fit to fund them on this occasion. I take the point about the risks to the organisation, but we've decided on these projects in our LTP for a reason. We've prioritised them because we think they're important for the community, and the community supports them and the city needs them. And sure, we've got a knockback on these things, but I think first and foremost, we need to push and push and push and argue and argue and argue. And there's none better than that than Dave. So I totally accept his point. Let's keep pushing NZTA, but also we need to look at ways to finesse the timing of things. Just because we haven't got the whole project cost yet doesn't mean we can't find a way to push on with implementation or business case or initial design planning in the meantime. So yeah, just want to emphasise that we must keep pushing here and not just accept the NZTA decision as a fait accompli and a final decision. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, look, thank you. I find myself agreeing with the Deputy Mayor and certainly his passionate entreaty for Waka Kotahi to support projects that involve mode shifts, such as our cycling bridge across the river. And I think, he and Dave are right. Red doesn't mean red. Red means the moment for green. And that's what our point of view has got to be. Dave's got to be right, and Jeff and Dave are right. You can't take no for an answer. Just the only other thing I would stress is I do think that these reports do stress and I say this to the incoming chief executive, and the need for appropriate and adequate staff resourcing at all time. And I'm just incredibly aware, and we must be aware of the enormous pressures that we are putting on our highly professional and competent team in a lot of these areas. And I know Richard's presumably across it, but it's something that we as a governance body must always be acutely aware. And certainly through the AP process, that's a discussion we need to have to ensure that the backroom, so-called, is adequately resourced around this stuff, and totally agree with Angela's point and her shout out to the incredible staff team we have.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Sarah.
Thank you, Rob. I really just wanted to support the previous speakers in terms of not accepting no. And I think this could be a really good opportunity, actually, now that very expensive bridge has been scrapped, to put out some kind of release or something and say, hey, we have a bridge right here which is a whole lot cheaper and is going to be even more useful probably than a harbour bridge. So I think, and we have some other amazing projects, so I really think we need to, I like the dancing in the background over there, Mark, have some kind of plan around how we advocate to get the funding we need for these projects, because they did get the support from the community in the long-term plan. And the community are expecting these projects, and a lot of them aren't aware that now suddenly we're kind of scratching our heads around what to do next. So thanks.
Thanks,
Sorry about
Sarah.
the dancing. I get
Mayor
very
Paula.
excited.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Following on from this thread, it occurs to me that this isn't just about what NZTA funds or doesn't fund, but it's about our whole strategic planning framework, our future-looking framework. The things that got public buy-in in the LTP are there alongside the strategic priorities that staff have been advising us on for a very long time. And so it concerns me that we set up a long-reaching strategic plan, for a growth plan for our community, We must keep pushing with all parts of government to make sure that they're helping us fund those, because otherwise we don't get the outcomes. And I think in particular of things like affordable housing and the ability to put capital works in the ground or on the ground to do that infrastructure is pretty vital if we are to deliver upon government's expectations for affordable and the community's expectations for affordable housing. So that kind of thing concerns me. Question though, if given that I was talking with Infrastructure New Zealand yesterday, and it was a really interesting conversation about what's going on with the Infrastructure Commission, the Productivity Commission, and many other things. The point is that for New Zealand, there's a bow wave of huge costs coming across most capital works. And I think, if I'm right, Chris, you've mentioned this to us before. So I would like to understand how comfortable we are years 2 to 10 of the long-term plan in terms of meeting the needs of our city and further out. And I'm not necessarily saying you should answer that today, Chris, because you did a good job with stormwater the other day when you told us there was $16 million in the plan, but then there was this bow wave coming of unfunded in years 11 to 30. I think this is something we need to really have a workshop on, and the whole nature of infrastructure, where the costs lie, what we're going to target, and that will help me and staff when we go to Wellington to be more precise about the force we apply for funding, if that makes sense.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Just some final comments from me while we're still in debate. Look, I take...
Say something, Chris, or no?
Well, we're in debate.
Maybe. Okay.
So just some final comments from
I think the point I'm making is that, it's really easy to go out to the community if we put a playground in, or if we put the dome over the pool or anything visible or new jetty. They go and look at it, right? And they say, oh, that, you spent that money, there it is. Might have a range of views on it, but there it is. The other stuff that we do, the core infrastructure we do, the water pipes under the ground, the upgrades to the poo plant, the southern wastewater plant, the roading infrastructure, some of the work we do to intersections is less visible, but we've got a huge amount of work coming over the next 30 years in New Zealand, and that's the conversation I want to have, so that the ratepayers are not taken by surprise, and they know that we're advocating to government very strongly, not just for next year in our annual plan or a little bit of our long-term plan, project by project, but we're advocating for help across the infrastructure spectrum, because that's what we need. What do you think, Chris?
Paula, can you wrap up, please? We're in debate, so we've gone beyond questions now. So I'd just like to...
Okay, I can't hear anybody.
Was something wrong with your sound? Can you not hear us?
Oh, so I couldn't hear anybody for some reason. Sorry.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to wrap up this debate now, just with some final comments. And look, I, along with a number of other elected members, take a good deal of comfort from the very dedicated and skilled team that we have in capital funding. They are agile, they're nimble, they're able to come back to us when circumstances change, despite all of the challenges that we've got out there. I did take credence of the comments by the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Sarah about the fact that we have been through a process with our community on what assets we would like in this community, and I think the government needs to take some view around the fact that these have been through a process and are what our community wants. I'm reminded too that a lot of the current roading network that we've got around the city came from significant input from the local MP at the time, who was MP Bennett. And I just wonder whether we shouldn't be putting some pressure on our local MPs that we've got here to go out there and canvass for us with central government on the particular assets that we want in the city, some of which are currently on a deferred funding list. Because if we don't do that, then I'm sure that the squeaky wheels elsewhere will do that, and they will get whatever crumbs are left over from the changes that that happen from this funding pool. So I think maybe we need to be a little more vocal as a governance group on bringing together aspects of central government who can actually advance the needs of the city in Wellington. Okay, so that being the end of the debate, I will put the motion to the vote. And if you could do that by show of hands, please, those in favour. Those against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thanks, Narelle. Let's move on now to item number 8, which is the financial performance and strategy report. Now, just to inform members of the committee that we have a decision that we have merged the second and third reports. The strategy report, which of course has been reported separately over the last 3 years. We've combined the financial monitoring and the performance and strategic report into one. So I would be quite keen on any favourable or unfavourable feedback that you might have after we have considered this report. So Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Rob. So that was the beginning of my speech already, so thank you for that. So I just wanted to alert committee members to the fact that this is just one report now. So very much, if I may, through the Chair, as has just indicated, any feedback or suggestions very much appreciated on what you've seen today. So if I just jump straight into the report itself, we are obviously we're reporting on the August 2020 results. So this is the first lot of results on our new long-term plan. We're starting the year slightly unfavourably in the accounting result area, and you heard that through Ian's report earlier around some of their capital projects just not quite starting off as far as spend. So remember, obviously, there's a difference between them actually doing the work and then obviously getting that money through and the spend through. So because of that, obviously what goes hand in hand with that is our capital revenue. So just the timing on that means we're just a little behind in that accounting result. And also a vested assets. So again, as you'll remember, vested assets are very much a bit of a roller coaster ride as far as trying to figure out and budget when they'll come in. From that perspective. So again, we're just keeping a watching brief on that particular item. However, in our balancing books result, we've obviously started off the year with a bit of a great start. So $1.1 million ahead of budget. Very much like last year, we're already in our fees and charges seeing great results from our consenting business unit. And again, some of our event activity from H3. So very much those two areas with fees and charges contributing to a really favourable result in that area. With regards to expenses, we're showing a positive result in personnel at the moment. So the organisation is very much still trying to fill a lot of the existing roles, which you heard us talk about last year as well. And obviously as part of the new LTP, we'd put in new roles to cover that. So a little bit behind in that space. But you'll also see in the professional costs line, which is where our consultants sit, that's a little bit unfavourable. So that's, again, an offset of trying to bring in some consultants to carry out some of that work that we're not able to do at the moment. So depreciation, so again, a little bit over budget at the moment. So this is mainly due to the buildings and investment property valuation that we got at the end of last year come through. So that was a lot more favourable than what we'd originally budgeted for. And again, some additional vested assets. So, we ended the year with a lot more vested assets than what we'd anticipated. So both of those obviously have an ongoing effect on depreciation. Nothing to worry about at the moment, and that will be an area that we'll kind of keep keeping an eye on as we work through this year. So, excuse me. So, regards to our financial strategy, So you'll see in paragraph 47, we've got a couple of budget adjustments from an operating perspective that we've highlighted in there. So one regarding the Waikato Metro Spatial Plan, and the other one around predator fencing. So as part of the recommendations, we've put those in to approve those two pieces of work. And the last thing, paragraph 50, our debt to revenue ratio. So you'll see we're already forecasting positive results against the long-term plan. So that was very much due to the cash positive results that we got through last year. So all of those fees and charges and DCs and all of that came through. Obviously that's all cash, and that means that we're starting the year off in a positive result with regards to our debt to revenue ratio, and that obviously has an ongoing effect in that space. So with that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Tracy. I see I've got a couple of members with questions. Councillor Mark.
Thank you. It might be a little bit of a silly one, but the vested assets one, that's, I presume, when developments come into our possession. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So do we have? How do we keep an eye on that? Because I would have thought that's something we could keep a pretty firm grip on, or is that just the value of them has changed?
A bit of both. So it's the timing of when we get them. So it depends on when they're finished, obviously, and ready to hand them over to us. And then, yes, the value of them as well. So it is a combination. So we obviously try our best based on obviously resource consents and other things that kind of come through to figure out when that will be. But it is very difficult. So,
yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, aren't there?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Angela.
Yeah, thanks. I noticed the my graph that I fought so hard to put in here on the vested assets is gone. My little list of things, and I blame the chair of finance for that. I liked that.
Okay, I can put it back.
It might have helped answer Councillor Bunting's question.
Okay.
Hey, just on Tracy, just on page 61, just a query in the stormwater. The DIA money for the water reform. I noticed up the top there, it says, and it talks, there's a commentary in the variance below that it's a favourable variance due to funds received from DIA for the stimulus package. But why is it in fees and charges? Shouldn't it be in subsidies and grants?
Sorry, what page were you on?
61.
Oh, hang on. 1, 2, that one. That's a good point. Thank you. I'll find out. Great question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Can you let me know just via email?
I will, absolutely.
Great.
I'll send the committee an answer on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Further questions on Tracy's report? I can't see any there. I've got one question, Tracy. Only one. And that is just a concern around the depreciation unfavourable in paragraph 10. That's about 800,000 that we're unfavourable by after 2 months. If we annualise that, that's about $4 million for the year. Are you concerned that that will be significant enough to turn our balancing the book budget around, or is that is it unlikely to be? It's incorrect for me to annualize it by multiplying the 800,000 by 6. It's actually 5 million, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think for that specific part, you're absolutely correct, and in that, and I guess there's about 5 or 6 parts that go into working out depreciation. So it depends on I guess all of those other parts and where they end up. So where we end up with our spend in the capital projects, where we end up with vested assets for this current year and things like that. So definitely something, an area that I am going to keep a close eye on, because it is big money, and as you quite rightly have said, it does affect our balancing the books. So I'm not concerned at this stage, but like I say, that might change once we kind of get into the December and we've done half the year. And ramping up to do our other evaluations for the following year and things like that. So I will definitely be watching that space.
Okay, that's good. Any further questions from any members of the committee? Okay, there being none, I will move the staff recommendation on page 41, paragraph 4. Do I have a sec? Oh, sorry, it's actually paragraphs 3 and 4. Do
I'll
I have?
second.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Angela. Is there any discussion, debate on the report? There is none.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. No, I just want to say congratulations, Sarah, on the predator-proof fence initiative. Looks like it's we're going to get it ahead. So well done. Good lobbying. I know you're trying to keep it secret.
I was just going to say, Mark, it's not done yet.
Okay, so we now go to the vote. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you.
Okay, let's. We're 10:30, and I've had a note that LGFA will be available from 10:30, and that conveniently fits in perfectly with item number 9, which is next on the agenda. So, Narelle, will you welcome in our two guests from the LGFA?
Yes, so we have Andrew here.
Hello, Andrew.
We're just missing the second at the moment. Andrew, I'm not sure if you're good to go without your other presenter.
Yep, so apologies for Mark Butcher, but we just launched a bond syndication this morning, so Mark's a bit tied up with the banks and investors on that this morning.
Is that good or bad, a bomb?
We do 2 of these. Typically, we do 2 of these
bond,
a year.
Not a bomb.
Bond,
bond, Rob,
so
bond.
we do most of our bond issuance
I
by
heard bond.
tenders. Yeah.
Okay,
Bond,
sorry,
I
I misread. I thought you said a bomb, not a bond. Okay, so David, you're the sponsor of this report. Do you want to introduce it?
No, this is just a regular report that we bring through the Finance Committee. The report itself is explanatory, so take it as read, but happy to hand over to Andrew. He has a presentation that he'd like to present to staff, and it's good to elected members, and I think it's a good opportunity for elected members to engage with Andrew and ask any questions that you have around the LGFA or any broader issues that the LGFA could be involved with.
Okay, thanks for that. And committee members, this presentation, which I see has come up on our screen now, is also under presentations on Diligent. So Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will talk to a couple of these slides, but I won't go through it in detail. Just one thing, the Shareholders Council asked the Board of LGFA to write to them in regard to the water reforms. So if there are any questions on LGFA's response, very happy to talk to them. In terms of the past year, we've continued to add new council members. So we're now up to 74 council members. Plus, we've also added 1 council control organisation. So that's our first, that's Invercargill City Holdings. So LGFA is now able and has lent to Invercargill City Holdings directly. But that's on the basis that there is a guarantee or uncalled capital from the parent council. So we've only got 4 more member councils, well, potential councils to join, and 3 of them are in the process of joining. So we'd expect them to join in the next 18 months. The only one that potentially isn't joining is Chatham Islands. And we have had discussions with DIA on them sort of joining. So long term, they might, but their borrowings are only like $500,000. So, well, we'd like to have them in. It's not financially significant for LGFA. On the liquidity position, we currently have $1 billion of liquid assets that we're sitting on. Last year, the Crown raised their standby facility that they provide LGFA from $1 billion to $1.5 billion and extended the term of that facility out to 2031. And every 3 years, we will roll that forward. So it's always going to be, 10 years out in the future that we have that. So it was good in the midst of the COVID crisis last year that the government did show its continued support for LGFA by increasing the size of that facility. And we've also had an increase in the number of councils guaranteeing LGFA. So I think we've had 6 councils that were non-guarantors that have been members of LGFA for a while and are now comfortable moving to that guarantee status. So that just means the primary reason for that is that they want to borrow more than $20 million. And if you're not a guarantor, the most you can borrow is $20 million. So it's good to see more guarantors joining. Oops. The statement of intent, this is just our forecasts for the next 3 years. And just highlighting the profit and loss on that top right-hand box is remaining around $10–11 million, which is sort of where it has been in recent years. But I just want to reiterate that LGFA is not a profit maximising entity. So this year we dropped our base lending margin to councils from 20 basis points to 15 basis points. And in addition, we also announced that for any council providing green or sustainable lending to LGFA, we'll give a further 5 basis point discount. So that would take it, if you do a green financing project, that would take your base lending margin to 10 basis points. So LGFA needs to generate a certain amount of profit in order to grow its equity as its assets continue to grow. But we're not trying to maximize our profit. So as we become more profitable, we will reduce the lending margin to councils so that councils get the benefit of continuing scale. The only change in the objectives was one of the secondary objectives. So we added in there the very last one, to assist the local government with significant matters. So last year was the COVID response, and we did change the LGFA covenants in response to that. And perhaps COVID is sort of coming back on the agenda a little bit again. And also the proposed 3 water reforms. So again, we will help the sector as that sort of issue progresses. In terms of our 12 monthly results, we met 9 out of the 10 performance measures. The only one that we didn't meet was to get 85% market share of all council borrowing. The issue on that one is that LGFA only provides Auckland Council with around a third of its borrowing requirements. The reason for that is Auckland make up more than 50% of the sector debt. And if LGFA provided them with all of its borrowing requirements, the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's and Fitch, would view LGFA as too concentrated in terms of its lending to Auckland. So as a result, we only do about a third of Auckland's borrowing requirements, which means our exposure to Auckland sits typically around 25% of LGFA's lending book. So that allows our lending book to be diversified. So when Auckland do a domestic bond issue in their own name, it reduces LGFA's market share. So last year, Auckland did a $500 million issue, but there are years when they don't do an issue, and that in those years, our market share will be a lot higher. When they do a big issue, particularly on that $500 million scale, it means our market share will be lower. But other than Auckland and Dunedin, which Dunedin currently finance in their own name, but are intending to join LGFA in the next sort of 6 to 12 months. We're pretty much picking up all council borrowing in New Zealand. In terms of some of the other objectives, we had no breaches of our Treasury policy. We've maintained our credit rating equal to the sovereign, so Standard & Poor's rate LGFA as AAA. Very importantly, we met all our lending requests from council members. And one thing we do control is our expenses. So again, our expenses came in at less than budgeted, which was good. And just this graph, this sort of shows you our operating gains. So as I said, you can see in the last 4 financial years, our profit's been 10 to $11 million sort of every year. And when we project that forward, it's remaining around the same. And you can see our equity continues to build. So every year we're paying out around $1 million to $1.5 million in dividends and retaining around $10 million in equity. So every year our equity goes up, which is good for guarantors to have a bigger equity base. But you can see our assets are also going up each year. So as council borrowing continues to increase to invest in CapEx, we need more equity, so that you can see that bottom right-hand graph. Our shareholder funds as a percentage of total assets is remaining around the same, at around that sort of 2 to 2.5%. So again, from a guarantor's point of view, you want to see that sort of being maintained so that our equity base essentially doesn't get diluted. That's just a graph of the interest rates as at the end of September. So you can see the red line is the government bonds, the blue line is LGFA's borrowing cost. So we're borrowing at around 0.5% when you go out to those medium-term dates over the government, over what the government is sort of able to borrow at. I'll just touch lastly on the LTPs. We compiled all the draft LTP numbers a little while ago, just to show you what is happening in the sector in terms of sort of debt level. So we've broken it down into the different sort of sector groups, and you can see the actuals over the last sort of 4 years, rural, provincial councils, it has gone up a little bit. So while debt has been increasing, revenue has also been increasing. So for those sector groups, the net debt to revenue ratio actually hasn't changed significantly. But for metro councils, their net debt to revenue ratio has increased by just over sort of 20%. So those bigger metro councils typically have more growth pressures on more public transport projects to invest in. And as they've been sort of doing those, their net debt to revenue has increased. Regional councils as well, that they've had a negative net debt to revenue ratio. So they've had more financial assets than they have debt. But a lot of regional councils have now been doing more investment, not necessarily in infrastructure, but more investment in their regions to support councils, often like within the Bay of Plenty, co-investing with councils and different sort of infrastructure sort of projects. And so they've been using some of those financial assets to invest more within their regions. When we looked at the draft LTPs, the gross debt of the sector is currently around 19 billion, and that's forecast to grow to 37 billion by 2031. So quite a big increase from the 2018 LTPs that had gross debt peaking at around 26 billion, so it's about $11 billion higher. When I look back at the last sort of 5-10 years, a lot of the growth in debt in the sector was being driven by Auckland and Christchurch. But in recent years, and what's projected in the LTPs, is a lot more of a increase in infrastructure spend right across the sector. So it's those rural, provincial, as well as metro councils now doing a lot more investment. Part of that has been driven by growth. So last year, only one council, which was Bulla, had a population decline. Very different than 10 years ago, where a lot of those rural councils were suffering population decline. So now a lot of councils having to invest in growth that, you know, previously wasn't there for. There's also been the ability to co-invest alongside government. So whether it's the Provincial Growth Fund, shovel-ready projects, the 3 water stimulus. So there's a lot more government-led things that have been available. And so that's actually driven and brought forward a lot of infrastructure investment right across the sector. And I think the last one is just a greater willingness and acceptance of the need to get on and do infrastructure investment. So very different than 10 years ago, where particularly a lot of those rural councils thought debt was a bad thing. Now they're actually prepared to use debt to invest in renewals as well as some growth infrastructure. So we do see a big increase right across the sector in net debt to revenue ratios over the next probably 2 to 5 years, but it does sort of level off towards the back end of the LTP. So out past 2024, things tend to stabilise, if not reduce. But it's a good thing when we look at the balanced budget outcomes across the sector, both in recent years and projected forward. On average, the councils are balancing their budgets. So the growth in debt is being driven by investment in infrastructure. It isn't being driven by the need to borrow for operating purposes. So we're very comfortable when we look at the LTPs that debt is being largely used for the right purposes. So I'll finish there and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Andrew. That was a good way to finish, I think, reminding us of the importance of making sure that we've got enough income to meet our operating costs and we are borrowing for the right reason. So Mayor Paula, you have your hand up.
Thank you, I do. Just a couple of quick questions. In terms of how we were performing versus government bonds, in terms of the effect of COVID as well, in terms of what those are delivering, I see that government bonds have not posted positively in a very long time. But how, at the moment, just through this COVID blip, how are we tracking in the marketplace in terms of that?
So in terms of the relationship between government bonds and LGFA's financing costs, the margins have been relatively stable, probably for the past couple of years, at around that sort of 0.5% sort of over. There's certainly been a lot more government bonds being issued, not just in New Zealand, but globally in response to sort of COVID. So governments have had to borrow more in the short term to pay for the reduction in tax revenue plus the additional costs associated with COVID. But the rating agencies and investors seem relatively comfortable with that level of government bond issuance that's occurred. And in fact, you know, so the other thing I comment to make about interest rates is we have in all likelihood reached the bottom of the interest rate cycle. So this week we're likely to see the first increase in the official cash rate from the Reserve Bank, and we're expecting a couple more, another one in November and then another one again in sort of February. So we're likely to see the OCR go up. But you can see when you look at those yield curves, it's already built into rates, so it's quite upward sloping. So the market is expecting that increase in interest rates to occur. Long-term interest rates have risen by about 1% over the past year, but interest rates are likely to stay low for a long period of time. So we're not going to go back to where we were 10 years ago, where councils probably paying 6-7% for their debt costs. So while they might rise a little bit further, long-term borrowing costs of 2 to 3, maybe a little bit more is probably the normal.
That answers part of that question in terms of also how we're responding in the global recession that's sort of occurring. We had all that discussion economically, whether it was a W, a U, or a V, and it seems to be a W with another little dip. So what are we expecting out of that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing has been the inflationary pressure. So that's probably the number one thing that's being sort of debated at the moment. So while there certainly are a lot of short-term inflationary pressures, how much of those are temporary? Is it just there's been a big rise in shipping costs that's actually going to reverse in a few years' time when the market gets back to more normal levels of activity? But certainly you can see massive inflationary pressures sort of occurring, and that's I think we've now had a couple of central banks. I think South Korea was the first one to start raising sort of interest rates, and like the US and Europe, they're still doing a lot of quantitative easing, so that probably has to be unwound before those central banks start increasing interest rates. But I would note there's so much debt around the world, there's a limit to how much interest rates can rise, and you can probably see that in New Zealand with the amount that people have borrowed for mortgages in the last few years, that they just couldn't sustain a significant, couldn't have mortgage rates going back to 6-7% because people couldn't afford to pay their mortgage costs. So
I guess that was my interest, little old New Zealand, but we're still connected to the global market as well. Just one last question. Green projects, I was two-part question. Green projects, was one really interested in that. Was that a policy? I can't remember where that came about, but that's interesting from a procurement point of view. What sort of green projects? And I also want to know, you did talk about the capital investment, that councils are more willing to take on debt and invest in capital, jolly well need to. But what kind of projects are you seeing largely being invested in? Are they core infrastructure projects? Are they water, roads, that sort of thing? Or are they other sort of softer infrastructure, playgrounds, libraries? What are councils seeking from LGFA for funding?
Yeah, we've been moving to collect more information on all of that. Traditionally, a lot of councils are just borrowed on a consolidated basis and probably can't tell you specifically where the money's being allocated, but more and more we're getting questions from investors about where are the proceeds going. And LGFA is probably at the better end of the spectrum when investors are looking at sustainable and positive things to sort of invest in. So we're not like into the fossil fuels mining. So those sort of companies are probably coming under a lot of pressure and starting to be on some excluded lists. But more and more investors are asking more questions. That's behind our move to want to introduce green and sustainable lending to councils. So we now have our framework in place, and we want to start doing our first loans in the final quarter of this year. So in the next sort of few months, we hope to make our first few loans. So a lot of the things that the three water assets, would be assets that would meet that criteria. But there's other things, a lot of public transport assets, 5-star green buildings, footpaths, LED lighting. So there's a lot of things, and we'll work with councils, and particularly those smaller councils that are going to need their handheld through that because they don't have a lot of internal resources to dedicate it. But we will, one thing that LGFA can do is bring, the framework to the sector and then work with councils, all the ones that want to do green and sustainable loans. So we'll identify a project with you. We have a independent committee that we've just appointed members to that will verify those projects and make sure they meet the criteria. And even though there's no financial benefit to LGFA, we'll give you a 5 basis point discount. So that compensates you for the little bit of resources that you're going to have to put into identifying those projects. And on an annual basis, you'll have to certify that it's continuing to meet the criteria. In terms of what councils are investing in, I think it varies between sort of sector groups. There's certainly been a lot more emphasis on renewals and the creation of the water regulator, perhaps bringing forward some of those councils that historically probably haven't done enough renewals. But there's also been a move over the last 5 years from councils to better understand the quality of their condition of their assets. So there's been more work going into it, and I think that's probably driving the better decision making about when things need to be renewed. But you can see in places like Wellington as well, it's asset failure is driving, some decision making as well. But things like the Provincial Growth Fund have driven a different range of infrastructure projects. Av has shovel-ready sort of projects. So places like Queenstown got a lot more money for their increasing in their investment in their town that have driven things. So it varies. And public transport, of course, in places like Auckland, just a huge amount of money that need to address the historical underinvestment that's occurred.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Rob, as we go forward and we talk about this infrastructure bow wave, I wouldn't mind rolling that in, the ability to finance at the same thing, if we could, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jadine.
Kia ora, Andrew. Thanks for your presentation. I just have a quick question about page 13, where it goes through the credit quality of the lending book.
Yeah.
I noticed that Hamilton City Council sits at a AA-, and I don't know whether there's a question for the wider group about whether we're trending towards an A+ or we're trending towards an AA or holding static at AA-.
Yeah, so we use this slide particularly for the overseas investors because they're not necessarily familiar with the individual names of councils. So whereas our domestic investors know who Hamilton and Rotorua and Queenstown are, if you're in Japan, you're probably not that familiar. So you don't actually know how good a credit quality someone like Rotorua or Queenstown might be. So if we can show them the second sort of look through in terms of there's I think 32 councils in New Zealand that have an external rating, we can say the weighted average credit quality of our book sits around sort of AA at the moment. So that gives them some level of comfort into the credit quality of LGFA's lending book. I would say, the ratings is just based on a certain methodology. So just, often if you're lower rated, it just means that you've actually been borrowing more to invest in sort of infrastructure. So it often reflects the timing of your infrastructure cycles as opposed to whether you are, it's not necessarily saying you're good or bad. It just says saying you've got more debt than another council, essentially. Whereas someone like a Bay of Plenty Regional Council, of course, regional councils don't have the same infrastructure requirements, and they historically have had a lot of financial assets that they've inherited. So when you own 50% of Port of Tauranga, it's no wonder you're going to come out with a AA+ credit rating.
Thanks, Andrew. Hey, through the chair, Mangai Jadine, it's David Bryant here. So in terms of our credit rating of AA minus, it's viewed as a very high credit rating. Standard & Poor's are our agency that review our credit ratings, and we've just completed that review a few weeks back and just been awarded, if you like, maintaining the AA minus. So we've been AA minus for a few years now, and that has reinforced the confidence in terms of not only our financial credibility, but also the way we're leading the organisation in terms of many other respects. So that was really pleasing.
Awesome. Thank you, David, because I was even interested in the comment on page 13 saying unrated councils are assessed as LGFA as having, in general, better credit quality than those without credit ratings.
Yeah, but that shouldn't come as a surprise because those, smaller councils don't have the same growth problems that larger councils do. So the larger metro councils simply have to have had to borrow more, and Hamilton's a really good example to deal with the issue of growth, so that you're sort of planning for that growth over the next sort of 10, 20 years. But I would say the best bank in New Zealand is rated AA minus. So, councils overall are better credit quality than the banks. And you can look at someone like Kiwi Bank, even though it's, really good credit quality, it's only a single A credit rating. So you can't underestimate how good the credit quality of the sector is. And that's the reason why LGFA works, is by aggregating all that credit quality, we can come out with a lending book that is better credit quality than anyone investing in a bank in New Zealand.
Kia ora.
Councillor Ewan.
Thanks, Chair Rob. Look, my question was in regards to, and it may not be on point, but it was on the broader context of Three Waters and how future potential water infrastructure would have historically been funded through accessing funds from yourselves, as potentially as we transition away to these other entities. Are these other entities going to be able to call upon the lending facility from the funding agency or not?
So as it stands at the moment, LGFA only has the ability to lend to councils, and it has ability to lend to council-controlled organisations, providing those CCOs provide a guarantee or uncalled capital. So if there was a CCO water entity, say Waikato Water, then LGFA would be able to lend to that, providing the councils that owned it were LGFA members, which they would be. LGFA is not currently able to lend to the new water entities as they are currently proposed under the government's preferred model. So for us to be able to do that, shareholders would have to give LGFA the approval to do so. So that will be an issue as it develops, that we will have to work with the Shareholders' Council and guarantors to see if that was a direction that they wanted to go in.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, one subsequent question, if I could. Are you, is the funding agency in any current discussions with the government, either about potentially a legislative change that would enable you to do that, or would it be purely an approval from your current shareholders that would enable such an activity of funding?
Yeah, I don't think there's any LGFA does have its own act of parliament, but I don't think it's anything to do with legislative changes. It would be a matter for shareholders to give LGFA direction on. But a lot of those details haven't been worked on yet because it would be something that will be discussed with the transition agency over the next few years, is how the whole refinancing of the sector would occur. So I guess shareholders would have to be comfortable with the risk. There would have to be, some financial benefits to existing councils, and there may well have to be some support provided by the government to mitigate any risk that occurred. So all those issues are things that there are no details on it at the moment, and more details would emerge once there's a transition agency in place that gets down to that level of details.
Look, thank you for your explanation. Thanks, Chair Rob.
Yeah, Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Chair Rob. Andrew, hi. I didn't quite hear the answer to the first part of Ewan's questions about, are you having discussions or have you had discussions with government at this point?
We've had discussions with DIA, but it's only at a very high level. So
right.
there simply are no details on how the refinancing would work. So whether for example, the water entities could go and raise a whole lot of debt and repay councils up front. But that's quite a hard thing to do when they don't sort of exist. So raising sort of $10 billion on day one by organisations that currently in place is a big ask. So there might have to be some reshuffling of the debt. So with maybe LGFA could lend some money to the water entities for a period of time to help them through, the setup phase. But if that was done, there'd probably have to be some support by the government to reduce any risk of doing that. Or councils could lend, the water entities money, but again, you'd have to be comfortable with the level of risk that exists around sort of doing that. So why would you want to do that unless, there's some financial benefit for you in doing so?
Thanks, Andrew.
It just has to be worked through, and we also have to be cognizant that, if there's a lot of reshuffling of debt, the big beneficiaries tend to be the banks who get paid for doing all of that. So we really, as a sector, need to try and make sure we reduce all the costs as much as practically possible, whilst controlling any risk.
Through the chair, if you don't mind adding to what you've said already, Andrew. So I sit on the Shareholders Council for the LGFA. So we are in close dialogue with the management and the board. And I can just assure elected members that we will bring any information that moves on this topic to the Finance Committee for further discussion. Hamilton City Council is a shareholder as well as a guarantor in the LGFA. And we would need to provide information to you to make sure that if we were going to lend, the LGFA was going to lend to water entities, whatever they may end up looking like, that we would be in a position that we are no worse from a guarantee perspective, and that the benefits were there for Hamilton City Council. So rest assured, we'll bring the information to Finance Committee should things evolve.
Thanks, David.
Cheers, David.
All right, not seeing any more questions, so I will put the staff recommendation on page 73 that we receive the report and note the achievements highlighted in the cover letter in attachment 1. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, JD. Is there any debate? No debate. Those in favour, please raise your hand. Against?
Motion is
carried.
Motion is carried unanimously.
Thanks, Narelle. Look, I think it's a good opportunity now to stop for a break. And it's 11:08 according to my clock. So let's come back at 11:25.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you getting on, Dave? You're still muted there, bud.
Sorry, I didn't realise that it was still kept alive. Here I've been doing my GST return and other useful things.
Oh,
and
yeah,
probably
but mine too. Darn it. Yuck. It's that time of year, isn't it?
LGFA reports are great times to get other work done. Oops, did I say that?
Well, Facebook's back on now, so all is well in the world.
I saw a great one yesterday. I wonder if I can, I'll share it. I'll text it to you now.
Yeah, do it.
Now, where is it? Here we are.
Can you put attachments on your chats on Zoom?
I think you have to do them as backgrounds to your picture, don't you? I've just sent you texted you the.
Hasn't come through yet. There it is. Oh, yes, I saw that on Facebook. Oh, mate. Yeah, I've finally lost my rag at someone about that last night, but I'll talk to you offline about it.
Yeah. Narelle's a bit worried that our discussion's being heard publicly, but we're always well behaved.
Absolutely. Totally, 100%. And then we both stopped talking.
I was actually investigating your attachments comment.
Yeah, cool.
Because it is a possibility on Zoom. I know it is, but I was just seeing, and it's not. So it'd have to be something that we change in the background before, like when we set the meetings.
I don't know if you want to use that one as your background, Dave, but
sure.
Just the top bit would probably turn up, or the bottom one.
Yeah.
Got a feeling we're going to be still on this next week, so I have to get my fancy background timer going again.
I haven't heard what's happened today. Have you heard? I mean, in terms of, I know there were 2 more people or whatever in the household in Raglan, but haven't heard.
It was yesterday, yeah. Yes, I have no idea.
I just saw 4 cyclists, all adult males, cycling past our front gate on River Road here, so I'm pretty bloody sure that they weren't in a bubble.
Oh, it's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah.
The big question is, can you travel between, now that both Auckland and us are in level 3?
We're in a higher level than they are.
We are. Yeah, we can't have picnics.
Yeah. Mind you, it's hosing down with rain. I was going to use another word at the moment here, so I don't think I want the picnic.
Is it hosing in Narrow here?
I think it's pretty localised. I can see blue sky in other parts.
Yeah. It's definitely
very sunny in downtown Hamilton, Dave.
Nice.
You get our used rain, and it'll come soon.
Used rain. I've never heard that before. Right, mate, you can come in. We're on a break.
I've never heard of that, but it doesn't surprise me that it's come from Dave.
I'm the font of all archaic sayings.
I think, could you perhaps dry it off a bit before it gets here, please?
Nothing like a trickle-down effect.
Right. Now, you know what the trickle-down effect really is, don't you?
I'm dreading this.
I won't say in polite hearing.
I was going to say,
I didn't take it there.
We're screaming.
It was an innocent comment. I didn't take it there. Just saying. And on cue, it just started pouring in Flagstaff on River Road.
Oh, that means it's coming.
See, there's our used rain coming up the road there.
I might just go get me washing in. We've got time.
You trying to earn brownie points, Bunty?
The Narrawahia rain has now hit Flagstaff, Dave.
Yes, so Jadine just said too, Bunty's rushed out to get his washing in because he's next up the road. Rob, do you know what the gap between this meeting and the council one is, if any? What's the plan?
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll see how we go through the next part of it. But if we can finish hopefully before 1, I think the next meeting is at 2, but I'd have to defer to Paula just to see what, or to Becca or Narelle as to what they had in mind, because we'll need a lunch break anyway at some stage.
Could we just check that before we get underway, perhaps, if that's possible, just so we know?
Yep. That's not a problem.
Just to confirm, Councillor Rob, the council meeting is scheduled to begin at 2 p.m.
Yes. Yeah, I'm aware of that in our diaries. I think Dave's question is if we finish early, finish this meeting early, do we go straight into the council meeting after, or if we have already had a lunch break?
Because the council meeting has been notified to begin at 2 p.m, we do need to start it at 2 for the public.
Okay, all right.
So we may have a slightly extended lunch break.
So that answers your question, Dave. It depends on when we finish this one.
Sure.
Okay, well, it's 11:25. Is everybody set to go?
We're ready to go.
Okay, great stuff. Let's move now to item number 10, which is the COVID-19 council rent relief eligibility, noting that we have agreed at the agenda setting that we will consider the matters around the garden arts additional grant in public excluded. So Nicholas, are you on? Yes, you are. Hello, Nicholas.
I am. Yes.
Good morning and welcome. You've got the message, Nicholas, about holding over the garden grant, the festival grant, until public excluded.
Yes, look, I was going to say that this is a 2-part report, and Sean Murray will be able to deal with that specific item. It's separate from the rent relief package that I'm proposing in this report. So look, just in terms of the report itself, a couple of things. The council provided, last time we were in this situation last year, a pretty generous package of rent relief measures to council tenants over a 3-month period. As a result of that, we've learned quite a bit more about how businesses have actually functioned during a COVID lockdown. And so what we're proposing this time around is a somewhat more tailored approach, specifically providing support to those businesses that are council tenants that particularly require it. So those are hospitality and retail businesses, primarily. Commercial and industrial businesses seem much more resilient in terms of their ability to bounce back and or trade through the various levels of lockdown. So I think what we're proposing here is a series of criteria for evaluation, an envelope which includes a sum and some timeframes. And I'd just like to say, in terms of those timeframes, when this report was prepared, of course, we were in a level 2 environment. Now we're in level 3 again. I would like to amend the recent recommendation to remove references to the dates. So I've sent one through to Narelle and Becca earlier today, which basically just says well, actually, can you put that on the screen, Narelle? Is that possible? That's the second one I sent through to you. Yes, that's it. So effectively, that takes out any references to the dates of the lockdown, given that we don't know what they are. But it says that for level 4 and level 3, 100% rent relief according to the criteria set out in the report, and for level 2, 50% according to the criteria set out in the report. Two other things to note. The first is that the government is actually working on legislation at the moment. Specifically, there's a bill working its way through Parliament that will propose changes to the Property Law Act, fundamentally requiring landlords to give consideration to tenants around rent relief in various stages of lockdown. So effectively legislating for what we're proposing to do here. And the second thing I'd like to just point out is if at all possible, it would be advantageous if the recommendation from this committee could be approved by the council meeting immediately afterwards, so this afternoon's meeting, in order to give us the ability to implement this recommendation rather than having to wait for another 5 weeks or so before we get the next council meeting. So look, on that basis, I'm very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Nicholas. I've got questions on the board. First of all, Deputy Mayor Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rob, and thanks, Nicholas, for this. Can I just check in terms of the timing of all this? I'm just trying to get my head around it. So this is probably about what 6 or 7 weeks after we went into that level 2. So we're going to do it retrospectively. Have these landlords, have these tenants been paying their rent anyway, or did they stop paying it? When level 3 hit.
Everyone is up to certainly current up to 90 days. I'm not sure. There may be one or two who are sitting out at sort of 60 days, but fundamentally everyone is still managing to pay their rent.
Okay, so I guess my question is, are we able to be a little bit more agile and nimble in these things? Because instead of sort of coming to the party 7 weeks after they needed it, are we able, in terms of rent relief, if we're asking people to pay rent for 7 weeks, even though the situation is, I'm just wondering, in going forward, are we able to be a bit more nimble and say, right, level 3's kicked in again, let's bring in rent relief? Do you know what I mean? We seem to be kind of quite slow.
Yes, I do know exactly what you mean. The problem really is around the delegations, the financial delegations. We simply don't have a staff delegation to respond in that way. I mean, we might be able to change that through the next review of delegations, and or alternatively, staff need to bring these matters forward faster and receive a sort of delegation to proceed.
Yeah, and that's not a criticism of staff at all in any shape or form. I'm just wondering, even in the wording of a motion, whether we might be able to make it a bit more nimble, because I'm mindful that one or two of the operators were actually continue to pay from elsewhere their rent in order to feel like they were paying us. I'm just wondering if we can be. I'm not sure how we do it, but is there a mechanism where next time it happens, we can be coming to the party, say 2 or 3 weeks after, rather than 7 weeks? You may have a better idea how we can do that.
Yes, I think there probably is a way of doing it better. I mean, I suppose we have a certain ability to flex within the 90-day period, and of course these. So effectively, we don't report up any debts younger than 90 days, and so that gives businesses the ability to withhold a payment 1 month and then pay it back the next, sort of thing. Fairly standard practice. But yes, look, I mean, I think we can certainly come back with some kind of recommendation around this that perhaps allows for future similar lockdown scenarios.
Yeah, thank you. I'm mindful of the fact that who knows how many years this sort of thing might carry on. So it might be useful to have a longer term kind of mechanism to do it. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mark.
Thanks, Chair Rob. Yeah, look, Nick, thanks for this. You mentioned earlier on that it's likely to be legislated anyway. So do you have any details on the level of expectations from the legislation? Like, are we on par?
Well, yeah, look, what I can tell you, and I'm looking at the minister's note here from the two relevant housing ministers, says that what is likely to be is an amendment to the Property Law Act, inserting a clause into commercial leases requiring a fair proportion, in inverted commas, of rent to be paid where a tenant has been unable to fully conduct their business in their premises due to the COVID-19 restrictions. I mean, what it boils down to is it's going to be a field day for lawyers because it's not particularly clear what a fair proportion means. But if you're asking me what, in terms of what we're proposing here, I think that would certainly pass the test. I think it's a fair and reasonable response without being overly generous.
Okay, and look, so this may be taken out of our hands anyway with regards to our commercial tenants. Yeah,
there will certainly be legal law about it, and that's no different from the first time of COVID when there was an issue with leases around access to premises, and the government has subsequently legislated to clarify that that issue.
But the legislation doesn't include community occupancy, does it? So it's just commercial. Is that right?
It will apply to commercial and residential tenancies. So effectively, in the standard forms of agreement, it will be there'll be a clause in those agreements. So we can certainly roll that out to our community tenants who are included in this rent relief package, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that. Thank you. I was just wondering, have we actually had any inquiry from our community tenants for this in this round?
Yes, we've had 3 inquiries.
Right. So would we, like, I'm obviously very supportive of it, but I'm also thinking, well, do we set this up as an on-application type sort of thing, or is it just an automatic, here's a sum of money, or here's some relief?
No, we're suggesting that it's definitely on application. And there is a lens that's cast over these applications. So there are tenants that we have that I'm quite sure wouldn't need and wouldn't qualify for this kind of rent relief.
Right. But getting back to Deputy Mayor Jeff's question, I guess we have to make it that the application isn't exactly a high hoop to jump through either at the same time. Is that right? So it's a fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think it's a fair balance struck between those businesses that can survive and can recover and do recover and don't necessarily need the relief. So the primary test is an assessment of need in the first instance.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, thanks for your work.
That's right.
Thanks, Mark. Councillor Maxine.
Oh, thank you. Couple of questions just to follow up on the line of questioning from Councillor Bunting and Deputy Mayor Taylor with regard to the bill. My understanding is also that it doesn't stop us from providing above what that allocation might be.
Correct.
Yeah, and then when and should this be approved, you talk about the on application nature of it. Will we be approaching our tenants to let them know about this and invite them, should they meet the criteria, to take it up?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Okay. And then finally, your report talks about values in terms of 122,000 and 60,000. Given that we're now in level 3 and that you've taken the dates out, might those values need to be reviewed? And would that include the period from 4th of October through to whenever we might come out of this future level 3?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question. Obviously, we've given that some thought. Look, you can change any of the parameters within the resolution if you think that, for example, that funding at that level is insufficient, or the time that we set out is insufficient. But what I would say is that our experiences the last time round were that there was a 55% uptake from tenants in terms of the quantum that was set aside to provide relief versus the amount that was paid out. So my view is that the 183,000 that we're proposing is probably sufficient for the applications that we receive, as well as this current level 3 extension. So that sets a sort of framework around a fiscal envelope, if you like. If we were getting close to exceeding that and it looked as though there was a real need to provide further funding, then we would come back to council and seek that in a further report.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Chair.
Councillor Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rob. Thanks for the report, Nicholas. Very helpful. Just a quick question, you could put it in context for me. I can see both the hospitality and retail, their rents, could you just confirm, are based predominantly on market costs, where the community sector are already heavily discounted?
Yes, that's correct. So for our commercial tenancies, so that's retail, hospitality, and ground leases, and industrial and any of those commercial tenancies, they're always assessed on a market rental basis. But the community leases are very heavily subsidised to up to and around the 90% mark.
So in light of that, Nicholas, in light of the fact that ratepayers are already providing a significant subsidy to these community groups, providing them an additional 100% reduction seems incredibly generous. How will you measure the reduction in financial income for community groups? Because frequently their funding is across an entire year. They're more likely to still have been able to retain that level of funding because it's not driven by commercial activity. I'm just trying to get my head around whether or not in some ways they're getting 2 bites of the cherry.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one. I'd make a couple of observations. The first is that some of these community groups or groups on community leases are in fact sort of pseudo-commercial operations. So they might be clubs that have a school associated with them, a school for kids or something of that sort. So they may have an income stream which is no longer available for them. So in that case, I mean, it's relatively easy to measure a decline in their in their revenue. Many of them, of course, are paying very little or small amounts, and they just aren't operating in those premises for the period. And therefore, if they were to apply for relief, it would really be largely up to the judgment of the council officer who oversees that portfolio as to whether or not they really had a genuine need or not. Now, I'm not backing out of the question here, but that community portfolio is overseen by a staff member in the Parks and Open Spaces area, and she does work very closely with these tenants and understands the way they operate far better than I can really comment on. So that's probably about all I can say, actually, in respect to your question, Councillor Wilson.
Nick, can I make a comment? It's Lance here. Just going on from that, Ewan. Our experience last time, most of the groups that weren't paying a lot of money for their ground lease or their building lease didn't actually apply because, you know, as they were already only paying $800 a year or $1,000 or something like that. And then you look at, you know, a month's relief, it was, you know, it was hardly worth their while to do that. And exactly what you said, they couldn't show financial hardship. So there's a whole lot of checks and balances in there. It would probably be just the top percentile who might have a large footprint or a large building and operation who may or may not have the revenue that Nick talked about, and then our staff would assess that through the criteria which is in.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thanks, Lance.
Thanks. Okay, any further questions? There are none. Let's go to the recommendation, and the recommendation is the recommendation on paragraph 3 with the changes this morning to the dates.
Happy to second.
Thank you. I'll move it. Thank you, Mayor Paula, as a seconder, and of course removing part 4, which is IV, which is around the Hamilton Gardens Arts Festival. So we now have a motion on the floor. Is there any debate? And of course, this is a recommendation to council, which Nicholas has asked for this to be.
Yeah, no, that's agendaed through you.
Okay, thanks, Mayor Paula. Okay, those in favour, please raise your hand.
Oh, sorry.
Against?
The motion is carried unanimously.
Oops.
Great, thank you. All right, so I will now move that the meeting resolve to exclude the public. Do I have a second?
I'll second that. I'll second for you.
Thanks, Councillor Maxine. If there's no debate, those in favour, please raise your hand. Against?